All right, lesson 2.3 is deductive reasoning, and our objectives are to use the law of detachment and the law of syllogism. So let's get started with our vocabulary and key concepts. First is the law of detachment. Now, the law of detachment tells us if a conditional is true and the hypothesis is true, then its conclusion is true. Okay, and so what this says in symbolic form is if P then Q is a true statement, and we know P is happening, then Q is happening. Okay, so nothing really too confusing there. Then the law of syllogism says if P then Q and Q then R are true statements. So we know if P happens, then Q happens, and we know that if Q happens, then R has to happen. So then we know that if P then R is a true statement. Okay, so this is called deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is the process for reasoning logically from given statements to a conclusion. So we use the information they give us to figure out what is going to happen. So let's check out some examples to see how this works. First is using the law of detachment. It says a gardener knows that if it rains, then the garden will be watered. It is raining, so we want to know what conclusion he can make. The first sentence is a conditional statement, and the hypothesis is if it rains. Because the hypothesis is true, so right here it tells us it is raining, we know that's happening, the gardener can conclude that the garden will be watered. That's all the law of detachment is. We know if this happens, then that happens. Hey, the first thing is happening, so we know the second thing is happening also. Okay. Number 2, using the law of detachment. For the given statements, what can you conclude? If angle A is acute, then the measure of angle A is less than 90 degrees. Angle A is acute. A conditional and its hypothesis are both given as true, so we know these statements are true. By the law of detachment, you can conclude that the conclusion of the conditional statement, the measure of angle A is 90 degrees, is true. Is less than 90 degrees, is true. Because we know that what we were given up here is true, so then this part has to be true as well. Okay, using the law of syllogism. Use the law of syllogism to draw a conclusion from the following true statements. If a quadrilateral is a square, then it contains 4 right angles. If a quadrilateral contains 4 right angles, then it is a rectangle. The conclusion of the first conditional is the hypothesis of the second. So right here it says, then it contains 4 right angles. The beginning of this statement says if a quadrilateral contains 4 right angles. So those 2 pieces are the same. That means that you can apply the law of syllogism. They have to be the same conclusion to the next hypothesis. So the first conclusion has to be the same as the next hypothesis. Because of the law of syllogism, we know that if P then Q, if P then Q and if Q then R are true statements, then if P then R is also a true statement. So we can conclude that if the quadrilateral is a square, then it is a rectangle. So the law of syllogism just kind of cuts out the middle of the two statements and combines it to make one. Okay, number 4. Drawing conclusions. Use the laws of detachment and syllogism to draw a possible conclusion. If the circus is in town, then there are tents at the fairground. If there are tents at the fairground, then Paul is working as a night watchman. The circus is in town. Because the conclusion of the first statement is the hypothesis of the second statement, you can apply the law of syllogism. Okay, so right here, then there are tents at the fairground. If there are tents at the fairground, those two parts are the same. So we can use the law of syllogism to write a new conditional. If the circus is in town, then Paul is working as a night watchman. We just cut out the middle statements right here. We got rid of the if there are tents at the fairground, and we went from the beginning of this statement to the end of the second one. Oops. Okay. The third statement means that the hypothesis of the new conditional is true. So the circus is in town. That makes this hypothesis true. So you can use the law of detachment to form a conclusion. Paul is working as a night watchman. Okay, so first we use the law of syllogism to jump from if the circus is in town, then Paul is working as a night watchman. Then it told us the circus is in town, so we use the law of detachment to figure out that Paul is working as a night watchman right now. Okay, check for understanding. Now it's your turn. Suppose that a mechanic begins to work on a car, finds that it will not start. Can the mechanic conclude that the car has a dead battery? Yes or no, and then explain why. It doesn't have to be a super detailed answer or a super detailed explanation. It just has to explain why you think yes or no. Okay? Then number 2, if a baseball player is a pitcher, then that player should not pitch a complete game 2 days in a row. Vladimir Nunez is a pitcher. On Monday, he pitches a complete game. What can you conclude? Because you were given all this information, what do you know? Then, number 3, if possible, state the conclusion using the law of syllogism. If it is not possible, explain why. Okay. Remember, the law of syllogism, the conclusion of the first statement has to be the same as the hypothesis of the second. Then number 4, use the law of detachment and the law of syllogism to draw conclusions. Okay, so you're going to be able to get 2 conclusions, just like we did in this example with Paul. We're going to be able to come up with a conclusion using the law of syllogism and then the law of detachment. Okay, so you should have 2 conclusions on number 4. 2 things that you figure out because of those laws. All right, that is the lesson. You have some work to get started on with those 4 examples that you're going to try. Make sure you're asking questions if you need them, and good luck.